We are here to talk about a number of things within the post-production track. We're going to focus on a couple of use cases for those who have been crazy enough to jump out there and start to test some of these new formats and these new things that are going on. And we're going to have a presentation by the EBU first, and then we're going to have a presentation by CBC next. So without much ado, we want to actually give them as much time to talk as possible. So I'm going to stop, and Frans de Jong and Dagmar Drisnek are going to come up, and they are going to give you an exploration into some of the lessons that they've learned from live HDR, UHD, and HFR.
Thank you very much, Renat. Thank you. So I'm Frans de Jong from the EBU, the European Broadcasting Union. I briefly want to introduce the EBU because it might be that some, especially new people here, don't know especially what we do. So the EBU is the community of public broadcasters in Europe. European broadcasters basically, but it doesn't stop there. So we have over 70 members in Europe in over 50 countries. We also have more than 30 associate members across the world. So for example here, NBC, CBS in Australia, etc. It's really a global organization. Total potential audience is over 1 billion people. The EBU has two phases. The phase that is most well known to the normal people in the street is the Eurovision Song Contest. We're not going to talk about that. We're here to talk about the business-to-business side, which also has two phases. One phase in the technical domain is development and innovation, so writing specifications, doing education, testing new equipment. The other side is an operational side, where basically we're providing via Eurovision Media Services every day around the globe operational services to provide content from place A to B, mostly live, stand-up positions, host broadcasting, this type of thing. So we said we can combine the two. Let's see what we can do with Eurovision Media Services, with 5 members, with 20 almost industry partners, and can we use a big event to test UHD, HDR, HFR, and NGA. So basically we said we were going to make our lives very complicated because it's already hard to work together with 25 different parties. Do this in the summer with a heat wave basically in Europe at a big event where everybody was already focusing a lot on the normal production. It was a lot asked, and then we also threw in all these different formats. But it was meant to learn. Basically we said this is a unique opportunity to be able to learn from a real world event and to create as live material. So there were a number of goals we wanted to meet here. We wanted to use a live production trial without having the constraints of a normal live production where you really have to watch out what you do on air, basically. So we said we want to see what we can do with current production equipment and a little bit of prototype equipment, but we really try to use only current production equipment, see how far we can get, understand what it means for the different workflows, understand what quality impact this has, and also allow people to have a hands-on experience, because not all the broadcasters have the chance to do this every day, and we want to understand from broadcasters how they look at this, because the EBU is really a user-oriented organization where the user is the broadcaster. So this is what we did, and another purpose was to create live content for testing, because one of the members, the RAI, Italian broadcaster in Italy, has a 5G and DVB-T2 test bed. They wanted to test this with different formats, and we also always need test material to test new codecs, new displays, etc. And typically that's hard to get, especially as live content, because you can have very beautiful content post-produced, etc., but it's not the same as the content you may make from a live production. So let's see what we did on the video side. Dagmar is going to tell us about that and what we learned there.
Thank you, Frans. Also, warm welcome from my side, and I'll give you some more insights on the video now. So, as you see, we had a real setup for the video part, and just an introduction to the venue we had. This was the Olympic Stadium in Berlin, where we had the chance to record various sports from high jump, pole vault, javelin, discus, and track events. And as you can see, we had the chance to record some sports in the morning with the sunlight, and we had also the chance to record in the evening, going from the sunlight to the artificial lights. So we could use all the various different conditions for an outside broadcast. Okay, let's have a look to the video, what we built up there in the video container. So we had for the production 4 cameras running in 2160p100. These 4 cameras were then fed directly into the production switcher. They were controlled via the normal remote controls for shading. We had the chance to record the uncompressed contents using 2 clipsters. We had also the chance to record some contents in XAVC using servers from Sony, and also some cameras separately. This is due to having test material under live conditions, as Frans already said, to do tests afterwards as if we have a camera outside. For the monitoring purpose, we used the BVM series from Sony. We had up to 4 displays there, but these displays were running only in P50 mode, so we could only see half of the content we've created from the cameras. And additionally, we had to down convert some contents to 1080p100 high dynamic range and also to 1080p50 standard dynamic range. These 3 signals as an outcome were then multiplexed together using HEVC real-time encoders, and we transmitted these signals, as said, directly to Berlin, to our container back. And we transmitted it to Glasgow and to the Valley d'Aosta in Italy. As you can see, we had to split the UHD P100 signal into 2 P50 signals because all the equipment was equipped with 4x 3G. And this is explained in the next slide, where you can see the backplane of the baseband processing unit of the camera, where we had to kind of modify the 2 channels, the channel outputs, channel A and channel B, which means we had one channel running in the odd frame mode and the second channel running in the even frame mode. And these 2 times 4 times 3G signals had to be fed through all the production systems. So it wasn't easy to distinguish always between the even and odd frames. So with the signals we derived after the production mixer, we had the 2160p100 as set. This was transmitted with a netto video bit rate of about 28 meg. This encoding was done, this live encoding was done with an encoder from NTT. And we had 2 encoders from ATEM, one doing the 1080p100 signal and the other one doing the 1080p50 SDR signal. As you can see, we had 2 times stereo, so the traditional audio for the UHD P100 and the 1080p50. And in the 1080p100 signal, we had to do a multiplex with the 3 audio flavors we produced there. So after 20 minutes, we had to switch between the audio modes to get all the audios on air. As we had to transmit the signal via satellite to the Valley d'Aosta in Italy, we had some constraints regarding the bit rate, so we had to put all the 3 services into one multiplex, and that's why we had to choose the bit rates written there above. And we recognized also that the 28 meg, for example, for the UHD P100 is a kind too less bit rate, but this is also a test we have to do afterwards with the material we got. Okay, let's come a little bit to the workflow things. So let's go to the shadings. We made 2 approaches. Our main approach was to to do an HDR shading, so the main focus is to get really good material for high dynamic range content in hybrid log gamma. But we did also an SDR shading where the HDR was kind of running with the SDR. And the shader was in his known territory, so he was familiar with all the knobs he had to press. But this may not use the full the full high dynamic range potential. That's why, as said, we did the high dynamic range leading shading with a risk. Okay, the SDR could have some compromises, but we know what happened, and we could reproduce all the material afterwards for further testing. What have we learned regarding higher frame rate? Well, to be honest, it is possible doing P100, but it's not practical. Having 8 times 3G for all the workflow, it's a risk to mix up the cables, it's a risk to mix up the signals on the infrastructure. Currently, there is no phase distinction, which means the even and odd frames within the SDI signalization. So everything is done manually. Although we have already the payload identifier standardized for the high dynamic range or for the HLG and the color space, but this is not yet fully implemented in all the equipment. So everything has to be set manually in the equipment. One big problem, I think, is the timecode. To be honest, we only have timecode standardized up to 25 or 30 frames. By using the field flag, we can go up to 50 or 60, but we are in the 100 frame mode, so all this, this makes the post-production not easy, let's say. We had no production or reference monitor running in the P100 domain, so we saw only half of the picture, let's say, but we had the chance to look to the UHD P100 signal using a consumer display from LG, which had a special firmware running on it, so we received the modulated signal back into the video container to see the full UHD P100 signal with the hybrid log gamma in. Currently, the distribution encoders are still in prototype mode, but they are available. And yeah, the file naming or combining afterwards is kind of cumbersome, so it takes a lot of time to put everything together afterwards. Looking to the shading, I think the main message from the shader we had on set was it is easier in HDR than in SDR. So if you have the picture right and you don't have to interfere or act regarding exposure time or anything else. If this is fine, it is fine, but you should always have a look to the waveform monitor also to see or to check if the stellar dynamic range output is still correct. Regarding the conversion process from HDR to SDR, with the setup we used, it is kind of complex, so we had to be sure that there are parameters set in the CCU are the same in the converter. But being outside on the outside broadcast, the conditions might change. You get shadows or sky changes, so you have to modify it somehow, and we are not sure that all the parameters are always the same between the CCU and the converter. And depending on the conversion, there could be a slight U-shift for the SDR signal, for the color space. What we need to do, and yeah, what needs to do is we need much more study on higher frame rate, especially for the UHD resolution. So we need to check the impact UHD P50 to P100 and also the 1080 P50 versus P100 with equipment which is today available. We need to include the latest display technology and also the display or picture enhancers which are included in the displays. We saw that the 1080p derived from the UHD P100 signal has a very good picture quality. And so we had a really good upgrade, and this could be the next step for various broadcasters to go to high dynamic range using 1080p 100 with or P50 with P100 with HDR. The main message we got there, it is a really good learning to get hands-on to the new technologies for our members, for our broadcasters, but also for the manufacturers. They had a chance to talk to the people which are doing these things on their daily business, and they got feedback directly. This was really good team spirit, and I think this is also visible on this picture which was shot on the third day and the last day, and all the people were still smiling. Okay, so I will hand over now to Frans again to talk a little bit about audio.
Okay, so although Dagmar, thank you Dagmar. Although Dagmar and I were in the video team, we did ask our audio colleagues how they perceived this trial. So a few notes about the audio. First of all, we, just to be clear, created 3 mixes with the content, right? So one service was the AC4 Dolby Atmos signal, which was a channel-based signal with 11 channels, so 4 at high, 7 on the normal level, and no LFE. We did a similar thing with MPEG-H, channel-based, and we did an MPEG-H scene-based signal, which was higher order ambisonics. So those 3 were available, and as Dagmar said, it was interleaved in time, but basically we tested all 3 systems. Each of those had a number of objects that could be used. And there were 2 objects in 2 languages. So one object was an EXA service, audio description, available in English and French. And the other one was a commentary. The English one was generated live, and we had a French one also generated live, but not specifically for us. But technically, that's of course the same. And these objects were meant for people at the receiving end to be able to play with the positioning of the objects and, of course, with the level. So you could really try the interactivity of the different audio systems. How did we generate these signals? We had an ORTF 3D array high up in the stadium. We had an Eigenmic in the field, which basically are 32 different mic capsules in one microphone, and this was mainly for the higher order ambisonics mix. And we had, of course, a number of spot microphones. I don't have a picture of those, but the host broadcaster had many microphones placed at critical positions. We got all of these feeds, and we could mix all of this together. Originally, the idea was to limit the Eigenmic for use only with the HOA, but in the end, we mixed everything, so everybody could use all the signals, and this worked pretty well. The main mix was done on the SSL console. We're using the digital audio workstation basically to be able to convert to the HOA format. We had monitoring with a System J, ITU System J setup, so we had 4 speakers high and 7 speakers, as I just explained, on the normal height, no LFE. We also had a binaural renderer to be able to listen to it on headphones. And then the audio that was produced in these 3 formats was sent to the encoders. First, there's a metadata step where the metadata is included into the stream, and then all of this signal is combined with the video, which was in this case 1080p 100 in 2 different phases, and this was because of encoder limitation. So we couldn't do the 2160p 100, which we would have liked to do, but it doesn't matter. We could still test the audio separately from the high quality video. So what were the audio learnings? Well, first of all, the good news was on site we discovered we could really mix all of these microphones together, and that was because the separation between the 2 special microphones was around 100 meters, so the correlation was very limited, and this gave us some extra room to play with these signals basically. It did make it a bit more complex to route all the signals because of the mixing between the SSL console and the digital audio workstation, but that was a good price to pay. We were a bit less happy with the audio that we picked up from the PA system in the stadium. This was a little bit linked probably also to the constraints we had because we were next to the normal production. I think if you would do a production as the sole production, you would get some more credits to put your mic where you really wanted to, so this could probably be minimized. We had a little issue with the delay of the codecs, as I showed in the picture here. You see that, and I will just try to find the pointer. You see here we had the Dolby encoder basically, which is a separate audio encoder, while the others were integrated. Well, this is not specific to a certain technology, it's just a different setup. You could imagine a different encoder in the future, but this meant that we couldn't really mix all of the signals into one mix and had to go to this interleaved mode, time interleaved mode. In terms of creative potential, people were very happy. So the mixers really like to be able to put things in height. And a good example of that is if you have a high jump, somebody touches the bar, there are microphones next to that bar, then you can put really that signal high into the mix, and that was much appreciated. I would say that overall the mixing was quite conservative, which is not strange because it was an S-Live situation, so you have to be careful. And the other reason is that some of the mixers were new to this, so they also probably have a more careful attitude towards mixing, but we try to push it a bit. There were no serious AV sync issues, so mixing in the mics where the action is was relatively easy to do. For a music setup that might be different, but for this sports event for us that worked well. The audio monitoring was complex. It was complex because we had 3 different mixes, but also for a single mix you would probably want to listen to your surround and stereo down mix as well, and then you have the different objects you could insert, so it is really a lot, and we think we need some better metering for this, some better visual clues that you know you're safe, and there are some ideas around this. The other reason why it was complex was, of course, that we were in a confined space for the audio in 2 containers, and there were quite a lot of participants, so we had to be careful that the speakers were not blocked. So we didn't make it easy for the people there. In terms of the metadata, there is, of course, production metadata defined in the ITU, so that's the audio definition model. It's just not available as a serialized format, and we think that that should be available if you want to use open metadata in production for this. So what about the experience on the end user side? We didn't do formal testing of this. We asked people's opinion at the IBC, so we showed and we demonstrated the audio at the IBC. And the general feeling is that people like the immersive effect very much, especially if they know that it only needs 1 soundbar and not many speakers. I think they like the interactivity less. They don't want to fiddle with buttons, etc. They probably want just a few presets. That's sort of the typical reaction we got. These user interfaces are still early days. I think that we'll see improvement in the user interfaces. And one of the issues is also that at the moment the user interfaces we could obtain were rendered by the set-top box, so not natively in the display. We'll probably see some integration in the future there as well, and also, for example, in middleware such as HBB-TV. Okay, this was the audio team. Also happy faces on the last day, so that's good news. What is the future outlook for us? So we think that the most important at this stage is really HDR, and we really need to make sure that the HDR workflow works really well in practice and that people know what they're doing and how they can reproduce it. And honestly, that is still quite a challenge for many broadcasters, and especially to the ones who are just starting with these things. It's pretty hard. And I think sharing experience is key, and we have several initiatives to follow up on that. I think they're breaking down the stage behind me. One question I have, and I also asked it to the speaker that we'll see after the next session, is what we can expect from shading controls. Will we have innovation in the way that shading is done, the tools you have to create a really nice picture? I think there's some opportunity for improvement there. Some of the European broadcasters, and Dagmar said it already, are thinking about maybe providing 1080p with HDR and/or HFR. And that's an upgrade path for distribution. We need to be very clear, for distribution over existing television distribution channels that might be very attractive in terms of a cost-quality balance. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't produce in UHD, and it also doesn't mean, of course, you wouldn't look at the signal on a UHD screen. There are some questions about HFR in terms of backwards compatibility. There are some proposals in DVB about using pre-processing and post-processing in screens. We're interested to understand what this means and what that can bring or not. There's the question on the longer term, what will we see in terms of frame rates? Will we go to variable frame rates on a program-per-program basis, or is this still far off? And for the audio, I think the main question is, what will the uptake of soundbars look like? I think that's really a critical question for broadcasters to consider to start to provide in NGA formats. So that's basically what we wanted to tell you. It was a great experience. And again, thank you to all the different partners, because it's thanks to them that this worked well. And thank you for listening.
Yes, Hugo Gaglioni from Sony. I just wanted to clarify something. Were you using SLOG3 in production and then changing to HLG for distribution, or HLG live in production, converting to HLG for distribution, or HLG in production and HLG for distribution?
The last option. We were using HLG in production and HLG in distribution.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Bill Feitner. I'm losing my voice, so excuse me.
You asked a lot of questions during this event.
I did. But this is more just a couple comments. Okay. On the terms of grading and a new set of grading tools, we've had a lot of experience with that. And we're in a new world. We're in a world where we're not just grading for one particular output, an SDR 709 output. And most of our grading tools have been oriented towards this task. So we have, in the dramatic side, the non-broadcast side, had a lot of experience doing that, and we've been porting and these kinds of tools over to the broadcast side. Things that deal with dynamic range and the amount of range. For example, if you're going out HDR, do you want as much HDR-ness behind someone's head in certain scenes? And so specific controls aimed at what we've found to be very pertinent trims, things that normal color balance and RGB, and a lot of those gain controls were done to offset deficiencies in cameras and drifts in cameras, which we no longer have. So we've done that. And then just a quick note, we had a lot of experience. So we did a test project beginning of this year where it was a common master approach where we did work with SLOG3, as Hugo asked here, as the main work through. And then out of that, we derived the HDR as well as the SDR with very, very good luck results, as well as we also had graphics and pool feeds that were in 709, and those were up converted, and so they got a good HDR feed from that and the other. So perhaps you know, that's been done and with a lot of success. So, and the video shader, basically what for him, he had one HDR monitor, an X300, and he was able to toggle between, without changing the monitor, between seeing HDR or SDR inside of HDR, so he could immediately see if his shading was holding for both. And his experience on doing so is that the one shading worked for both, but so he had a lot. It was way easier than anyone thought.
Yeah.
So.
I just want to stress two things. First of all, we didn't mix HDR and SDR monitoring for the shader on purpose because we wanted to give him not the wrong reference. So he was either shading in HDR visually or in SDR. And the other thing is that the look overall, we were happy that it worked well, right? So the quality was okay. It's just that there are some difficult situations if you have a lot of backlights or a very high bright spot, which is not the main focus of the action, basically. What do you do with this? And I think
that's the number one problem.
It's in that domain that we're interested to see, will there be some tools to help with that?
Yeah, and those are specific tools that we've put into the package to address that. So perhaps we can talk afterward and I'll update you a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Seeger with NBC Universal. Two questions. First, what were your differential gain settings? Question two is, did you see any loss in highlights when you converted to SDR if your shader lost control of diffuse white? So if it came a little bit high.
Did we see that? So I must admit, the settings I should look up because I don't know the settings by heart, but we logged all the settings, so I can tell you afterwards. We didn't do a very precise comparison at the moment between the SDR and HDR, so we want to study that in more detail. Overall, we were happy with what we saw in terms of the highlights. Of course, there's much less room in SDR, so it didn't look the same, but we were happy overall, very much.
Hey, great presentation. Greg Cope with CBS. So let's talk about graphics.
Yeah.
Did you originate in HDR Graphics?
So we had SDR graphics, which were basically converted for us by the BBC, using the BBC process to graphics that we could use for this event.
So your target brightness there was what? 75% HLG?
Yes, that's right.
And so what did you do about the key signal?
That's a good question, and
It's
I
a
don't
very
know the
good
answer. Andrew, do you know what we did with the key? Because you did the conversion, right?
Did you, was it 100% or? 100%? Yeah. Otherwise the HDR behind it punches through and wrecks the graphic, right?
Yes. But I must also say that for us, the graphics, it was a little bit part of the test, but we didn't at all focus on it.
Yeah,
it was really just to give it a nicer feeling.
Sure. And one thing we've noticed is that if you create a transparent graphic, that doesn't work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's have a coffee. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please tap the like button and also subscribe to our channel to receive notifications when we add new content. For more information about us, please visit SMPTE.org. We'll see you next time.